Welcome back to my home. Today, we're gonna dive into some questions that you guys gave me over on Instagram. And they're all around the topic of budgeting and food budgeting. And I love them because they're such real life, practical questions about how we practically stick to our food budgets, because it's hard sometimes. I am Kezia from the Whole Home blog, Instagram, and this YouTube space. My goal on the internet is to make sustainable, lower footprint living feel a bit less complicated, a bit less judgy, and a bit more budget friendly. The first question was, what is your budget structure? Do you have buckets where things come out of? So this is kind of a part 2 video. You don't need to go back and watch part 1 before you listen. But I answered this question in its own video on how we land on our food budget, because how can we stick to a food budget if we don't actually know what number we're trying to hit? And that's such a common problem. So I gave it its own video, but basically, yes, we take our whole income and we look at all the places we need it to go and then balance things between the places we want it to go, so that before we get a paycheck, we kind of know where the money's going. And it means that each month we know what we're trying to spend on food, and know that if we spend that amount, it's not just a number we picked because we thought we should stick to it, but it's a number that means we can pay for housing, we can pay the bills that are coming up and all of those things, and nothing's gonna surprise us too much. So that's how we do it. So our number is very strategic, it's intentional, and it relates to all of the other things that we have to do with our money. And so the next question was, how do you determine your target food spend? That comes into the same thing. So many people pick an arbitrary number for what they think they should be spending on food. If that's you, you are so not alone. Go back and watch that other video. I'll link it at the end. But we need to have a number. So food, I see in this bracket as it's essential, but it's flexible. So there are some that are essential, but not immediately flexible, like rent or a mortgage. And there are some that are non-essential and very flexible, like going out to the theater, to the cinema. Non-essential and flexible. So that's like gets the bottom rung. And so I kind of fill in the budget of essential things first and things that can't change, and then look at that bit that's left over. And it's this slight juggling process, but it means that when we come up with a number, so we currently spend £25 per person per week for our food budget. And I know that if I can spend within that, everything else is taken care of, and that is mindful of all the other expenses that we have. So, okay, the next one was a good one. How do you manage budgeting with a partner? How do you manage a budget with a partner? And I wish that there was a really easy answer to this. There's no magic trick. Like anything shared with a partner, a spouse, a roommate, anything like that, whoever you're sharing it with, it takes conversation, it takes a bit of understanding that you have different values and different people will want to spend different amounts on different things. And we have so experienced this within our food budget. It can be really hard. When we sit down to have these conversations, we tend to take a moment for them where it's calm and try and not have them in the moment. Like, you spent what, you did what, but like, okay, let's schedule a time in the calendar and sit down and have this conversation. If someone wants to change a budget, make it fun, get a drink, and then have that conversation in a happy space, rather than the kids are running around and one of us brings up money, we know it's not gonna go very well. So having conversations in a good, as happy and safe environment as you can would be one thing. One practical thing we have found really help is, well, having your budget out there on paper is massively helpful, because then it's not, I think you're spending too much, or we shouldn't spend on that. It's actually locked into numbers, and it makes it a lot easier to actually have a productive conversation. So this seeing your numbers on paper, putting a budget out there, looking at receipts and how much you're spending in different places compared to each other. And on that budgeting tool in the last video, I'll link it below, there's a tool so that you can look at the percentage of spending in different categories. And when you can see those numbers, it kind of becomes a helpful third-party mediator in a way, or third-party tool or something to help a bit with not saying things like too much, or I don't like that, but getting specific. Okay, how can we solve this? You would like to spend more on meat. Where do you see that money coming from? Or then looking at the grocery budget and going, okay, this is the amount that we have to spend. If you want to eat more of something, where would you like to see that pulled from? For us, our biggest thing has been my husband valuing eating out far more than I have. I would rather spend more on food at home and get more for our money. He really values the going out and the eating out. And it's really hard to go, wait, let's go out and spend 25 pounds. But if we spent that at home, I can feed a human for a week versus maybe getting a meal out. This is so hard to pit those two against each other. And so it's really taken, okay, let's look at all the spending. What's the least amount in that budget for eating out that would make you feel like you were getting what you need? How can we make that feel better for me? And lots of just talking it through. I'm not sure we can eat the way we do and eat more meat without putting more money in the food budget. Is there something you would like to see go from what we eat? Or is there another budget you'd like to see that money come from? Looking at real numbers can make it a more practical, real conversation that can have solution rather than just difficult conversations. One thing that we have found really, really helps us is divvying up budgets more specifically so that we feel safe, like we're gonna get the things that are important to us, but the other one doesn't feel infringed on. So for us, we didn't lump in all food together. We had an eating out budget and a food at home budget and an alcohol at home budget. Now, some people could lump those all together and it would work for them. For us, that let my husband know he was gonna get to eat out every month, but me know that every month we weren't gonna be having these conversations about, I wanna eat out, but I wanna buy better food at home, but I don't value that. That's not gonna be fun for me to go out and eat because I'm gonna be thinking about what we could buy at home. We both could feel safe that our needs were being met from the budget. And it then allowed us to have practical conversations about, okay, if we put that much in the eat out budget, there just isn't enough to make it through the month in the other budget the way that we like to eat. And then, okay, now we can have a practical conversation because there are some numbers with parameters on them that we know fit in our wider budget. So divvying up budgets has really, 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 really helped us. Okay, I love this one. How do you stop your kids eating all the good stuff like yogurt? This is a really common problem. I look at Instagram all the time and there are so many reels that hit my feed of people saying, I can't budget because my kids eat too much fruit, or I'm victim to how much fruit my kids eat. A few ways that we approach this are, firstly, I know my budget. I know what I cannot go over and therefore have to find ways to stick within that. I can't just go, well, my kids ate too much fruit, so I have to spend more. That isn't an option to stick within my budget. So we meal plan everything and we eat meals. And these would be my top 2 tips here. So I'm meal planning for the week. And when we buy everything, it comes into the house with a purpose. Everyone in the house knows that. As the kids get older, I meal plan with them too. My 2 older kids, I do some of the meal planning with them. So they're a bit bought into that process. But everyone knows when food comes into the house, for the most part, it has a purpose. Sometimes I'll put fruit out on the table and then people know that's kind of more fair game. That is so rare. And then there are some things that usually are like bread. There's always usually more bread. And so that's less of a limited item or portioned out item. But otherwise, things come into the house with a plan. And there's a meal plan. So the kids will ask me what's for dinner or what's for lunch, and they know what's coming up. So they will ask me, but then no one is snacking in between meals. Which means A, they come to meals hungry and everyone's happy to eat a lot bigger range of food than they would be if they weren't hungry. But also no one's going to the fridge, adults or kids, no one's going to the fridge in between meals and just taking what they want. If that works for someone, that's great, that's fine. We can't stick to our budget and create budget meals that people are gonna eat and make it through the week unless we plan meals. So that is what we do. And everyone knows that that is how our kitchen works. If they are hungry, I'm gonna say, dinner's in an hour. It's pesto pasta and sausages and see you then. We don't eat between meals, but that means no one's coming and just taking things from the fridge. So then if we finish a meal and people are still hungry, they'll go, what can we have? And then we look and we see what is available with the meal plan and what we can eat. And yes, it takes a little bit of thinking in the moment, but it means that we know everything's come in with a purpose and we're going to be able to make it through the week on that budget and not have to run out and grab things because someone ate all the strawberries on day one. Last week I bought strawberries, they were for Saturday morning. They sat in the fridge until Saturday morning and then they went on waffles and then they were gone because that was the plan. So those are probably my 2 biggest things, and letting kids into the conversation and saying, you know, oh, we're gonna stop there because the rest of the strawberries are for a different meal. We're gonna have them on waffles at the weekend. So we're gonna save them. So we're done on strawberries, but here's something else that you can have. And it's a reality of life that not many people can afford to eat whatever they want, whenever they want. So I think that's a skill I'm okay having them. I'm not demonizing food. I'm not telling them they've eaten too much or that it's bad or anything like that, but simply we plan our meals, those are planned for another meal, and that's when we're gonna have them. That combined with not snacking means that just doesn't happen in our house. Would it if my kids had access to the fridge and we didn't operate by meal plan? So many fun things would go. But those two things are my biggest tips for that area. Okay, next question. If we have protein goals for health reasons, how would you do that on a budget? I love this question because if you've watched any of my How We Eat in a Week, I think sometimes they don't look like the most protein full meals because they're maybe not the foods that we think of as being high in protein. We pretty much revolve around the more budget-friendly protein sources. And some of those things are so high in protein. We eat a lot of lentils. Lentils have about 18 grams of protein per cup. You can soak them and cook them, or you can sprout them. They are a really great source of protein. We do lentils, we will do eggs, we will do sourdough toast, 2 slices of sourdough toast, like what I would give. Sometimes my kids will have 3 slices of toast for breakfast, or even 4 if they're really hungry, but 2 have about 8 grams of protein. So if we do 2 slices of toast and some yogurt and some granola with nuts in, or 2 slices of toast and a nut butter, a high protein nut butter, that's maybe giving them another 8 grams of protein. And then some yogurt, they're getting a pretty protein packed breakfast without going for meat and eggs or things like that. Or if we're putting some eggs and roasted veggies, maybe a couple of fried eggs, and then you've got about 12 grams of protein on a 1.5 cups of lentils is gonna be about 27 grams of protein plus 2 eggs, and you're at 33 grams of protein just from a cup and a half of lentils and a couple of eggs on top. Then you could add in some nut butter on some yogurt or something like that, and you really can stack the protein with these cheaper protein sources. So that's pretty much what we're doing. And then I'll make soups with chicken carcasses and things like that, those cheaper cuts of meat as well. We'll absolutely add those in. But if I'm thinking, you know, every meal getting those things in, we do okay for protein. And if I was more conscious, I could really ramp that up again with those cheaper protein sources. One thing that really helps get the protein in is, again, not snacking, because we come to those more nutrient dense meals hungry. And so my kids are hungry for the 2 eggs, the 1.5 cups of lentils, the roasted broccoli and the sourdough, a nice protein packed meal, rather than having snacked on something that maybe wasn't super high in protein and then coming to the table and eating an egg and being done. So it means I can protein pack the meals with those cheaper protein sources and everyone's hungry to eat it. Another way that I could do it is obviously by buying less good quality of meat in terms of non-organic meat or something like that. Then I could get more protein in, but I feel happy right now with how I'm able to balance budget with still sticking to organic and well-sourced, more environmentally friendly meat. But that is obviously an option. Another thing is looking for meat on like waste food apps. We have a carvery local to us that will do a to-go box from the carvery at the end of their session, or looking in the supermarket, grocery store for, you know, clearance meat and things like that. It's all going to be within its sell-by date. Looking for those things as well, saving them, putting them in the freezer, and then having more budget-friendly protein options that way. Okay, the next question was, what do you do if there is literally nothing left? So on this, I will say nothing left. It's going to be different for different people. I don't stock a big pantry. I have a whole video on that. You can watch that here on why I don't keep my pantry really well stocked with food. So nothing left is going to be different for different people. I do tend to always keep a giant bag of lentils and flour. So I can usually make toast and lentils, or some kind of lentil dip and wraps, or there's a number of different things you can make just from lentils and flour. I am always planning ahead, and so if I can see that money is feeling stretched, I can adjust the meal plan for that week of the month to go, okay, we've got to spend less here to get us through. And then I'm choosing the cheaper meals. So I'm kind of aware of which of our meals are more frugal and which are more pricey. And on a week where I can see, this isn't going so well, we've got more rice and beans in there. We've got more chicken broth soup. And if the kids say, can we have nachos? We'll go, oh, that's such a good idea. We're going to save that for next week and push out the more expensive meals. So I'm kind of thinking ahead and looking at the budget. Okay, what do we have left? How was last week's spending? How are we doing for the month? And I'm adjusting as we go so that we don't get into that spot of having nothing left, because I am able to, plan like that for the month. So nothing left to us is different from what it's going to be for somebody else. I can also look and go, is there a different category of life that I can pull from? Do we not need to buy any clothes this month, and so we just won't save any clothes money? We'll use that for food, so maybe pulling from somewhere else. Or if you have the ability, pulling from next month. I will kind of pull from the next week if I need to, if I feel like, oh, I can make next week work with a little bit less. I try not to pull more than the next week, because then it gets messy. Also, I'm then assessing, why did this happen? So it happened this week to us right now. I've got 2 more days on our food plan, and I had some meat that went bad within its sell-by date. I don't know if I'll get that money back from the company, but the meat went bad. And so I was gonna make a chicken soup. It was gonna be 3 meals. That's gone. So I'm now really having to look and go, okay, I wanna make it to another 48 hours. I am really looking through and going, what do we have to make meals with? And I'm probably gonna revert to some of those lentils, and I'll make an extra loaf of bread, and we'll work with that. But I'm assessing, why did this happen? Okay, this was really not my fault this time. Maybe put meat in the freezer as soon as we get it and pull it out. I thought it was fine. So I'm looking at why it happened. I've always got to reserve something dry, and then pulling if I need to from somewhere else. The next question was, if food sensitivities mean you can't eat sheep, how do you budget? It can be really challenging. We have a couple of things. I have one person who's intolerant to peanuts, and then someone else who can't do dairy. My kids eat a lot of peanut butter, but my husband, for that corresponding meal, needs a more expensive almond butter. And I'm buying vegan cheese because I don't want that kid to feel like they're missing out, and that is a greater expense. There could be far more, and it can be really, really challenging. At the end of the day, all of these kind of what if scenarios come down to 2 things. I can either be more efficient with the money that I have, or I can pull from somewhere else. And I think if I had more food sensitivities, I would have to be looking at things like, okay, we're gonna do fewer little indulgence foods. We've got ice cream in the freezer right now. Like, maybe we cut that. If that, that's one option. Maybe we don't have so much ice cream, and we're putting our money into the more nutrient dense parts of the meal plan, and just really maxing out on those nutrient dense pieces, done in an allergy or food sensitivity friendly way. I would also be going back to my full budget, because that's the other option we have, is to change the budgets around, if it is an option, and going, are we putting money anywhere that actually I value less than my food budget? Is there anywhere I can pull extra money from to add to the food budget? And it's frustrating, but those really are the only 2 options we have at the end of the day. But I think in a way it helps to know that there are only options. And when we had one that went dairy free, we didn't increase the budget, but I'm having to be a little bit more frugal in some places to make that work. Okay, and the final question, part 1 and part 2, as kids get older and eat more food, how will you adjust? And how do you have friends over for a party? So kids getting older, again, it kind of comes back to those 2 things. If the income is staying the same, we get to be more efficient with our food budget, which personally, I feel like I couldn't be that much more efficient. We cut out alcohol, it's not very nutrient dense. I would really be pushing in all these kind of scenarios, pushing our spending into the nutrient dense foods. But it may be that some of the other budgets change. Maybe at that point they're older, maybe some of them are earning, and maybe the clothes budget changes, and actually I can pull money from that. They can pay for some of their clothes, and I can put more money into the food budget to cover greater food needs. But it really does go back to those 2 things. We can go back and adjust the budget, or we can be more efficient with the food that we have. We currently use our food budget to choose more sustainable and organic options. If I axed that, I could probably buy half again to double the amount of food. So that's always an option from where I am. But if that's not a value, if you can't pull a value out of the equation, then it really is being more efficient, choosing, bulking meals out with, more bread, homemade bread. Look, is there something I can make from scratch that I don't already make? That's a massive game changer. So finding like a staple like sourdough. I make good organic sourdough that's really cheap, so that I know if I need to bulk out a meal, I can do it in a pretty nutrient dense way that I feel good about, and that really helps. So I would look at some of those things, but really it does come back to either I gotta change budgets or I gotta be more efficient with what I have. And on entertaining, I love that this question came up. My biggest thing is learning to entertain frugally and being okay with that. I feel so relaxed not serving, not getting in like, okay, what cuisine should we make for this event? Or, you know, what theme should we do? Or what are all the different things we can do? But going, that's not in my budget. And so I'm going to be okay serving a chicken soup made from chicken carcasses, and I'm going to make it really happy and fun. And I'm going to make chips to go with it and make really nice homemade bread, and it'll be a really happy meal, a really frugal one, but a really happy one. And actually going, I'm going to be comfortable doing that. Or I'm going to serve sparkling water as the fun drink and nothing else. And that's going to be a cheaper option than doing wine or doing other juices or other things, but I'm okay with that because that I'm happy to entertain within my budget. So I think that's a massive one, to be okay entertaining within your budget. Practically, we have done a lot of inviting people for brunch or lunch in our lives because that's a really budget-friendly way, I think, to have a really fun spread. We'll do a big pancake spread for, you know, multiple families, or make waffles for a ton of people. And you can do waffles and coffee and fruit and, you know, homemade nut or seed butters and things like that for quite a crowd for way less than it would cost to entertain those people for a, you know, a lunch or a dinner. So that's a big one, doing, you know, that kind of thing. Or just finding the meals that you can do quite frugally. So we can churn out pizzas if we make the dough, make a tomato sauce, and then just get cheese and do simple toppings. We can churn pizzas out quite, you know, quite frugally, but I'm not putting a ton of different toppings and shredded meats and salamis. They're simple. They're working with what we have. Maybe we even get some nettles from the garden and throw on some foraged nettles. Just being okay to entertain within our budget is a massive one that I think is really important. But with kids, finding the frugal things. We love doing homemade popcorn. Big bowls of homemade popcorn are great. It fills kids up. You can do some fun drizzles and toppings on it. It's so frugal. They think it's fun, and it's really budget friendly. So a combination of being okay serving the more frugal options and just making it happy, but also, you know, finding those things that really work for a crowd that actually don't cost much. Okay, and those are all the questions that were asked. I love them. If you want to stick around, 2 videos I'm going to point you to that tie into this topic. This one is on meal planning. It is just, I sat down, I hit record on a day when I was meal planning, and I take you along with how I think as I'm doing the meal plan to really stay on budget. And then this one is the part 1 to this video, and it's looking really specifically at how we dive into our budget to find our perfect grocery budget for each phase of life.